Each year, more than 1,000 ships are scrapped and dismantled around the world. Some are tankers that once hauled millions of barrels of oil. Others are cargo vessels that fueled global trade. But many, like the one we just saw, are luxury cruise liners, once worth hundreds of millions of dollars, now reduced to rotting steel and fire. And the vast majority of these ships, over 70%, don't end up in high-tech recycling facilities or dry docks in Europe. Instead, they're deliberately beached on the coasts of Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, where they're dismantled by hand, often with no safety protocols and minimal environmental oversight. This is called shipbreaking, a brutal, controversial process that fuels a billion-dollar global industry. To the corporations that offload these ships, it's an easy way to dispose of a depreciated asset. For the men working these beaches, it's a job, a dangerous one, but sometimes the only one. And beneath the surface lies a story of profit, pollution, and policy failure. A global shell game where environmental laws are sidestepped and the consequences are quietly exported. Today, we're going to break down how this industry really works, step by step, and what it reveals about the hidden cost of the things we throw away. Let's start with a question. Why South Asia? Why are most of the world's ships retired not in Europe, Japan, or the United States, but on remote beaches in India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh? The answer, unsurprisingly, is money. Dismantling a ship in a regulated dry dock in the West can cost millions of dollars. You need specialized equipment, trained labor, and strict environmental controls. But in places like Alang, India, or Chittagong, Bangladesh, that same ship can be scrapped for a fraction of the cost. Labor in these countries is up to 90% cheaper, and environmental regulations are often non-existent or unenforced. Workers are paid just a few dollars a day, protective gear is minimal, and instead of using expensive machinery, ships are simply rammed onto beaches at high tide and picked apart by hand. To get around stricter laws in their home countries, ship owners use a common loophole called a flag of convenience. This means they register their ships under foreign flags, often countries like Panama, Liberia, or the Marshall Islands, right before decommissioning them. This sidesteps environmental obligations and frees them to sell the vessel to cash buyers. These cash buyers act as middlemen. They purchase the ship, reflag it, rename it, and sell it to a scrapyard in South Asia, typically within a few weeks. This removes all legal responsibility from the original owner, even if the ship ends up polluting local waters or killing workers during dismantling. It's a system optimized for profit, not accountability, and it's been working for decades. So how does shipbreaking actually happen? What's the process once a vessel arrives on the beach? It begins with a maneuver called beaching. When a ship is decommissioned, it's emptied of cargo and towed to a breaking yard, often across continents. Once near shore, it's rammed at full speed into the mudflats. The goal is to drive it as far inland as possible, so workers can access the hull without needing cranes or floating platforms. From there, the dismantling begins. First, teams of workers begin the preliminary stripping phase. They remove furniture, wires, windows, insulation, anything that isn't welded to the ship's skeleton. Much of this material is resold locally. Even toilets, ceiling fans, and kitchen equipment get repurposed. Next comes the most dangerous part, cutting into the ship's structure. Workers climb aboard and begin slicing into the steel hull using oxyacetylene torches. Sparks fly, metal groans, and with each cut, the ship becomes more unstable. Inside the ship lurk hazardous materials, flammable gases trapped in pipelines, tanks filled with oily sludge, and insulation containing asbestos. In many cases, no safety precautions are taken. Workers might not even know what chemicals they're being exposed to. Once the interior is gutted, the ship is dismantled section by section. Massive steel slabs, sometimes weighing several tons, are dropped onto the beach with a crash. These are then dragged inland using chains, pulleys, and old industrial winches. In Bangladesh, it's not uncommon to see oxen pulling chunks of hull through the mud. Every piece of the ship is accounted for. Steel is melted down and recycled into construction materials. Copper wiring is stripped and sold. Motors, doors, stairs, and beams are hauled off and resold in local markets. It's a brutal form of recycling, but one that squeezes every ounce of value from these maritime giants. And while the process may seem primitive, it's astonishingly effective. A single ship can yield thousands of tons of steel, which is often reused in the very countries where the ship was broken down. Still, every step of this process carries a cost, and it's not just financial. Shipbreaking is one of the deadliest and dirtiest industries in the world. On the beaches of Alang and Chittagong, men risk their lives daily in conditions that would be illegal almost anywhere else. They cut steel while standing barefoot in oil slicks. They climb unstable scaffolding without harnesses, and they breathe in a cocktail of lead paint, asbestos fibers, diesel fumes, and chemical dust day after day. Explosions are common. One wrong cut can rupture a gas line or pressurized tank, turning the ship into a fireball. Crushing injuries happen when multi-ton slabs of steel fall unexpectedly or are dragged at the wrong angle. Many workers suffer long-term health issues, chronic respiratory illness, skin diseases, nerve damage. But with limited healthcare and no formal labor protections, most injuries go unreported, and the workers go uninsured. Then there's the environmental toll. Every ship carries with it decades of oil residue, lubricants, heavy metals, and toxins. As the ship is dismantled, these chemicals leak into the soil and sea, contaminating the ecosystem for years. Beaches become chemical graveyards, and the ocean becomes a toxic soup, devastating local fisheries and marine life. According to NGOs like the Shipbreaking platform, these coastal zones have become some of the most polluted areas in the world. But without strong enforcement or international pressure, cleanup rarely happens. And yet, for thousands of families, shipbreaking is a lifeline. It's one of the only sources of income in regions where industrial work is scarce. Entire communities depend on the industry, not just the cutters, but the scrap dealers, welders, truck drivers, and resellers who make up the ecosystem. It's a paradox, an industry that brings both livelihood and harm. One that recycles the world's waste but leaves scars behind. You might wonder, if it's so dangerous and so damaging, why is this still allowed? The answer lies in loopholes, lagging regulation, and international blind spots. In 2009, the Hong Kong Convention for the Safe and Environmentally Sound Recycling of Ships was introduced to set global standards for shipbreaking. It called for ships to be properly decontaminated and for recycling yards to meet minimum safety and environmental criteria. But here's the catch. The treaty only applies to countries that ratify it, and many of the worst offenders haven't. Even in the EU, where stricter laws exist, ship owners often dodge them by reflagging their vessels just weeks before scrapping, registering them in countries with no enforcement. Some progress is happening. A few large ship owners now choose certified green yards in Turkey or Europe, where dismantling is done in dry docks with proper waste disposal. These clean ship-breaking yards prove it's possible to recycle responsibly. But for most companies, the economics still favor the beaches of South Asia. Activists and environmental groups continue to push for transparency, naming and shaming the companies that dump ships on unregulated beaches. And as public awareness grows, the pressure is mounting. Still, the system remains largely intact, because for now, profit beats principle. So let's return to that image, the massive cruise ship, beached and broken, with its steel bones scattered across the sand. Once, it was a floating city. Now it's being dismantled by hand, piece by piece, by men who will never know the luxury it once offered. This is the final chapter for thousands of ships every year. A global industry hidden in plain sight, where first world waste becomes third world burden. It's a reminder of how deeply connected our world is, and how uneven those connections can be. But things are changing. Slowly. Awareness is rising. Some ship owners are rethinking their end-of-life plans. Regulators are catching up. And the people working on these beaches, they're not invisible anymore. Still, the question remains, is this really the best the world can do with its waste? Because until something changes, the tide will keep bringing more ships and more stories to these rusting shores. If you enjoyed this episode of Complex Made Simple, you can support us by liking and subscribing to the channel. If you have any suggestions for a future video, leave it in the comments. We'll be sure to give you a shout out if we decide to use your idea.